Sitting here on a frosty winter morning with a cup of bulletproof coffee, as it's called. And I thought it might be the moment to give a short introduction to the three heresies of Dog Zen. I'm happy to inform you at the outset that these three heresies are simple and they do not require elaborate thought or elaborate analysis. They can be stated in a simple way. They are simplific propositions, to use a word I like that I introduced a good many years ago when I was teaching in Santa Fe. They're simplific propositions, and it's a pleasure to learn them, and it's easy to retain them. I've already introduced the first heresy of Dog Zen in the introduction talk on the course landing page for Dog Zen. So I'll restate it and hone the language just a little bit in this way. The mind, which is your mind, your ordinary mind, as you know it, is not intelligent. Your mind is the tool of your intelligence. The difference between your mind and your intelligence is the difference between something that is insensate, such as a tool, a hammer, a sewing machine, a Swiss Army knife. Those are tools which are not alive, but the intelligence that uses those tools is alive. Your intelligence resides, for lack of a better term, in your entire body. So when you speak in the idiom of Dog Zen about intelligence, as far as it refers to the human animal, it is the intelligence of the body-mind in totality. The body-mind intelligence, the head-heart intelligence. It belongs to the living animal. Take a Swiss Army knife. It's a tool. It is not alive. It has a number of accessories, different kinds of blades, a screwdriver, scissors, a corkscrew, and all may have a magnifying glass, tweezers. And you, the intelligent animal, takes the Swiss Army knife in hand and does things with it depending on your intelligence. There are some human animals who would not know how to use a Swiss Army knife. So the use of the tool requires an intelligence that is independent of the tool. The tool is mind. Your mind is not intelligent. It is the instrument of a living intelligence. And that living intelligence that uses the mind is not just you, the individual human animal, with your self-centered, self-reflecting mind, but it is the greater intelligence of all that lives. So that is the first heresy of Dog Zen. The difference between the mind and the intelligence that uses the mind. The first being non-living and insensate, although it can handle sensations, and the second being living. The mind can handle sensations, obviously. But the mind itself is insensate. There is no sensation in the mind. It's numb. Thoughts lack sensation. Nevertheless, the mind is a tool equipped like a Swiss Army knife with a number of accessory features so that it can serve as a tool for intelligence, and intelligence is alive. Now, there is a corollary or a direct inference of the first heresy, which is not exactly a heresy in itself, but you could say it's heresy 1A. And that is the inference that one makes from the first proposition as such. Well, mind does not create anything. Now, one of the propositions that you find stated endlessly in Buddhism, and particularly in Tibetan Buddhism and Hatha Yoga and those higher levels of the Yanas, is the statement that the mind is the source of all phenomenon. That's probably a pretty close exact translation of a line that you can find in Longchenpa and other Dzogchen masters. The mind is the source of all phenomena. And you encounter that line, that statement, that proposition, repeated countless times. Well, the first heresy of Dog Zen totally undercuts that proposition. The mind, your mind, as you know it now, does not create anything at all. I mean, isn't that obvious? If that is not the case, then let me see you create something with your mind. And I mean create something material. Manifest a lemon pie, or at least a slice of lemon pie, or place a bowler hat on the head of that man sitting over there on the park bench, or manifest a chipmunk wearing sunglasses, as Don Juan was said to have done in a Castaneda episode. The mind does not create anything. The mind is lifeless. Life is the supreme, omnipresent, creative force. The mind has no life. The mind does not create anything. That applies as well to the ordinary mind, SEM, as they call it, S-E-M-S. I don't know if the S is pronounced. SEM is the ordinary mind, the working mind, the mind as you ordinarily know it. And it applies as well to the enlightened mind. The enlightened mind does not create anything at all. The enlightened mind is not the creative source of all phenomena. So that's an inference. You can consider it to be a second heresy. Next, we come to the second heresy in this little list of three. And that concerns Rigpa, although it does not actually say so. There's something particularly subtle in the proposition attached to the practice of counting to one. So in Dog Zen, you count to one. Just think of that for a moment. Usually, if you make a count of numbers, you count from one. 1, 2, 3, 4, you count from one. If there are some apples on the table and I want to know how many they are, I point to one apple and I say 1, 2, 3, 4, and I count from one. But in Dog Zen, you count to one, and the way you do that is by repeating this statement. what directs your attention to the productions of your mind is not a product of your mind. Now notice that the word Rigpa is not contained in that statement. However, it is implied. And when you pronounce that statement, when you reflect on it, it automatically raises the question, is, quote, what directs your attention, end quote, Rigpa, or is it not? Now, in the practice of Dog Zen, you leave that proposition open. You toggle both options. You say yes and maybe not. You leave the mind loose in deciding if what directs your attention is identical to what is called Rigpa or not. At the same time, you allow yourself to, let's say, entertain the idea, you engage the possibility that yes indeed, Rigpa is what directs your attention to the productions of your mind, although Rigpa is not a product of your mind. You see, that's how it sounds if you state it with the inclusion of the word Rigpa. Now again, in floating this proposition, we do quite a bit of floating in Dog Zen, rather like a dog paddle. The dog floats and the dog paddles, so we're dog paddling. We dog paddle through the realm of phenomena, including mental phenomena. And so while you're letting this proposition float and you're saying, either that way or either that way, maybe it does, the mind goes to another conclusion. Naturally, automatically, on its own, it goes to the conclusion, well, if Rigpa is that which directs your attention to anything, whether it be in your mind or in the world external to you, apparently external, if Rigpa directs your attention, then that means that Rigpa directs. And this proposition, Rigpa directs, is extremely heretical. I don't think that you will find anywhere, except possibly in The Jewel Ship by Longchenpa, any kind of language of Dzogchen which says explicitly that Rigpa directs or explains how Rigpa directs. But in Dog Zen, you float this proposition. What if Rigpa directs? Well, if Rigpa directs, if Rigpa is the mysterious agency that directs your attention to the productions of your mind without itself being a product of your mind, well, there you have a fascinating field of investigation. And all you have to do is observe your own mind and see if and how your attention is directed by an agency that is not produced by your mind. Now, to a certain extent, this proposition, the way I'm framing this proposition, is completely consistent with the conventional view of Dzogchen. Because in that view, Rigpa is what produces your mind. It is the pre-conceptual awareness of the mind as such, Sem-yi, before any concept is formed. So Dzogchen continually affirms the fact that concepts arise in the mind from a pre-conceptual pristine awareness, which is called Rigpa. But they never go quite as far as saying that Rigpa directs your attention to the products it produces. They teach that Rigpa, the pristine pre-conceptual awareness of the mind, produces not only concepts in the mind, but also the realm of sensory phenomena. So you see the difference between these two propositions. Finally, we come to the third heresy of dog Zen. And this heresy is a flat-out statement which does not actually have an ontological or noetic character. It's just an assertion that has to be considered on its own terms, and you can take it or leave it. You can believe it or not. Whereas the first two propositions can be tested, and you can observe, and by observing how the mind works, you can become more and more lucid and more confident in handling those two propositions. The third heresy is just a flat-out statement that would be regarded, certainly, as totally objectionable to traditional Buddhists of any kind, whether they be Hinayana, Theravadins, Mahayanists, Tibetan Buddhists, Zen masters. And that statement goes like this. Due to the conditions that pertain in Kali Yuga, this enlightenment has nothing to do with compassion. The enlightenment of dog Zen has nothing to do with compassion. In the first place, you are not required to develop compassion or express compassion toward anyone whatsoever, except for one case. That case, that special case of compassion, would be the subject of another little talk. But just by way of introduction, and to conclude this talk, be clear on this point. Compassion is a very big deal in Buddhism, and there is endless yakking about compassion. And there is endless preaching and prescribing compassion. You must be compassionate. You must develop compassion. And the subject of compassion plays around the subject of enlightenment in two ways. There are two ongoing implications of how compassion is involved with the attainment of enlightenment. So one of the implications is, well, you must first undergo practices of compassion and become a more compassionate person, even to attain enlightenment. Therefore, it is a prerequisite of the realized state. But there's also another implication that plays around on the other side of enlightenment. And that implication goes like this. Anyone who attains the realized state of enlightenment also attains high compassion, extraordinary compassion. Buddhism for 2,500 years has carried this claim, and it has enforced this assumption. If you encounter Buddhism, you will be met with this assumption. The enlightened one is the compassionate one. Enlightenment brings compassion. So they get you going both ways. You have to bring compassion to your quest for enlightenment in order to achieve it. And then when you achieve it, you acquire an extraordinary degree of compassion due to having reached the realized state. And in Dog Zen, all of that goes completely into the rubble. It's not even worth considering. There is a special place and a special case for compassion in Dog Zen. But there is no insistence and no requirement whatsoever that you be compassionate toward the entire world, toward all sentient beings. There is no requirement to undertake such a commitment. In fact, on the contrary. So in concluding with a third heresy, which is extremely outrageous and objectionable by the standard terms of Buddhism, I think you would agree on that. In concluding with it, I can make possibly an even more objectionable and outrageous statement, and I'll put it in the first person. So this is Lama Lovemut speaking in the first person. Lama Lovemut, the progenitor of Dog Zen, says, if anyone came to me out of the world of Buddhism, anyone whatsoever, the lowest student or the highest realized Lama or Rinpoche, and said to me that I need to develop compassion, how do you think I would respond? Well, let me tell you exactly how I would respond. I would say, lack of compassion really isn't my problem. As a matter of fact, my problem is I have too much compassion. That being so, would you be pleased to tell me, would some Buddhist master be pleased to tell me, how do I handle that problem? I can't wait to hear the answer.